Say the days of the week, starting with Sunday and stop at Thursday. Get ready.
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Oh! Almost got it. That was almost everybody did it right. That was great. Okay.
This is a story about an educational genius who changed the lives of thousands of at-risk kids from Baltimore to Texas, from Nebraska to the Australian outback.
How many months are in a year?
His system, direct instruction, was based on a philosophy that if a child failed to learn, it was never her fault. Rather, the instruction was to blame.
June, July, August, September, October, November, December.
That was really good. I heard almost everybody. That was really good. Was that good? Was that fun? Okay.
It was, but it was funny when he was there.
Today in his 80s, Zig Engelmann is still hard at work in Eugene, Oregon, where he lives. Every day, he continues his mission to help kids learn.
And we'll check for the number of exercises and then their order in the lesson. And we may have to cut some stuff depending on.
Ironically, Zig Engelmann never set out to be an educator. After graduating in philosophy, he went to work in advertising.
I was working as a marketing director for a medium-sized advertising agency, and they wanted to know how many repetitions it took for kids to learn something. So I had the job of looking up in the research libraries information about how much repetition it took. I couldn't find anything, not a word. And so what we decided to do was get a little group of kids together and run some slogans and things by them. And the thing very quickly evolved into a school. So I ended up with a little tiny preschool there, about 4 or 5 kids who came and went, as it were. And then I ended up doing stuff with my own kids, my oldest kid, Eric, and then my twin boys, Owen and Kurt, who are fraternal and don't look much like each other. And it was great.
This is Owen, and this is Kurt. They're twins, and they're 4 years old. Last year at this time...
Twins and brothers.
And brothers. Last year at this time, they could count, and that's about all. During the year, they studied the mathematics according to a program I developed. This film attempts to document the results of that program.
355 plus 297.
Right.
5 plus 7, 12. Put the 2 down there, the 10 up there.
Yeah.
10 plus 50, 60, 60 plus.
I learned a ton, and what I learned most was if they made a mistake, it was probably my fault. From there, it was just a question of I had to get into education. I didn't want to be in advertising. That didn't seem to be my shining star in any way.
I'm going to give him a different problem. He's never seen this one. It's the same kind of problem. Okay, Owen? That's a lousy looking rectangle. Yeah. Say that it's J here, 4 there. Say that it's 20 square feet in the middle. Okay, this is J.
Count by 4 is how many times to get to 20.
Yeah, and how do I write that?
4 times sign J equal 20.
Good.
So, in 1964, Zig set out to get a job in education. His plan was simple, if naive, to show the film of him teaching his sons mathematics to different educational publishers and institutions, and hoped that they would hire him. The first 26 all turned him down flat. That left the Institute for Research on Exceptional Children at the University of Illinois.
Word got around the Institute for Research on Exceptional Children, where I was working at the time, that there was this advertising executive who was going to show us a movie about how he taught his 5-year-old kids algebra. So I went down just out of curiosity. I wasn't expecting a whole lot. And then on comes the movie, and he was amazingly clear and forthright, and he was kind of quizzing them but teaching them at the same time. And then he could explain why he did it, how he did it, and so on.
6 times 9, 6 equals 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. So there's 36 square inches.
That's fine. Thank you.
And I thought, this is somebody we need on our project. The project was called Accelerating Intellectual Development in Young Children. And if this wasn't accelerating intellectual development in young children, I don't know what was.
Zig was hired, and within a few months, Zig and Carl had decided to start their own preschool for poor, at-risk children. In the beginning, Zig did a lot of the teaching.
6 is right. 6 is right. You had it, yeah. Very good. 12 over 2 equals how many whole?
6.
Let's try one more. Okay, are you ready for one more? Can I make this one a little bit tougher? I'll make this one really tough. Oh, boy, that's... Oh, you guys are just too much.
Working with kids, he was absolutely fantastic. He was, I think, unique in terms of his ability to challenge the kids in a way that really reverberated inside them. He'd say things like, oh, this is too hard for you guys. You'll never be able to get this. Never. They would get it, and he'd be all over them with praise. That was so memorable. He had those kids eating out of his hand. He is an absolute genius. Education has never seen anybody, in my opinion, even close to him.
8 plus 2 equals 10. Say it.
During the years that followed, Zig also developed programs on language and reading.
Reading was one of my pet interests, and I'd done some research in it. And I said to myself, this guy knows more about reading than anybody, and yet he's just exploring how to teach it. He didn't come there as a reading teacher. He didn't have a formal background in reading. But his logic, his brain, his ability to figure out exactly what needs to be taught, it's incredible.
Many of the features of what became known as direct instruction were worked out at that preschool. Whatever was being taught, tasks had to be analyzed and carefully sequenced so that there was only a single interpretation. So as not to confuse the children with inconsistent language, teachers used scripts.
Sax, get ready. Said, get ready.
To ensure all children were following, unison responses were required.
Get ready.
Children were regularly assessed and grouped according to ability, not age. The effects were dramatic.
All of us felt that we were really on to something. We were seeing things we hadn't seen before. The kids we had in the kindergarten program were all pretty much able to read, and their average was at mid-second grade level toward the end of kindergarten.
Find a shoe that is long. Find another shoe that is long.
But critics argued that DI put too much pressure on kids.
People were unhappy about the scripts, they were unhappy about the unison responding, they were unhappy about the signals. All of those they saw as examples of trying to turn children into robots and teachers into robots.
Fractions? What
Yeah,
are
fraction action.
fractions? Uh-oh. Well, I heard him. Okay, here we go.
Zig was undaunted by criticism. colleagues and family recall his determination and competitiveness in all things.
When I was a kid, I figured he could do anything. He, he was an ex-boxer. He could throw real well with either hand. He was fast. He was quick. He was big, 6'3", 210, 220. So yeah, I remember him as being very athletic, and I couldn't beat him at anything until I was 19 years old, and then only when I got lucky.
Almost everything he said made sense and was funny at the same time, greatly funny. A very original thinker who didn't have much truck with academic research at all.
He didn't talk like an academic at all. No, people said he was rude, he was arrogant, he was abrasive, all of those things. But I always felt if anybody on this planet Earth deserved a little bit of tolerance in those areas, it's a genius like Zig.
Then a wonderful opportunity arose to demonstrate DI's success to the educational establishment. It was called Project Follow Through.
I was in New York and I gave a talk, and after the talk, this guy comes up and introduces himself as Dick Schneider, and started talking about follow-through and that they were planning a follow-through program. So Schneider said that they were meeting, all the follow-through sponsors were meeting the next week in Washington. And could I be there, and were we interested in becoming a follow-through sponsor?
In Project Follow Through, a great variety of different educational approaches were to be compared in a big national trial.
It represented a broad array of philosophies, and again, it was in the mid-60s, so you had a lot of open education. The British Infant School, in fact, was the most extreme. You had language experience, where children would be immersed in literature and learn to read that way, supposedly. You had Piagetian programs, Dave Weikart's high scope program. So just about anything you could think of that had much visibility was represented by one of the models in Follow Through.
Carl Bereider by now had moved to Canada, and his place on the team was taken by psychologist Wes Becker. The project lasted from 1968 to 1977.
We had the full range, like we had several Native American sites in South Dakota. We had a lot of black sites. We had a couple of Spanish-speaking sites. We also had Cherokee, North Carolina. So we had a really big sample, and we had probably a total of over 40 schools.
Then, in 1977, the project was evaluated.
The data was that we beat everybody in everything. We beat them in the affective, we beat them in the cognitive, we beat them in the basic, and there was no comparison. We were off the wall, the only one that was superior in all categories, everything measured.
Okay, Maggie, does that sentence tell about those toys or ask a question about those toys?
Ask a question.
It asks a question about those toys, doesn't it? Very nice.
But Follow Through's organizers didn't crown DI as winner.
It was totally devastating, because then they said that they weren't even going to disseminate true data on follow-through. And like Wes communicated with senators and tried to do the political thing. And in that, the book that I wrote last, the PAIN book, Teaching Needy Kids in Our Backwards System, I have some letters there from, like one from the Commissioner of Education that mentions in several places. Only one model was successful with all kids. Therefore, we cannot disseminate information on follow-through models. Why? Because it didn't meet their standard that there would be all these different combinations that they could futz over, that there was only one winner. But he said in a couple of places there was only one winner, and that was the Becker-Engelmann model.
I thought Project Follow-Through would cause direct instruction to be accepted nationwide overnight. I was so naive. I had no idea that it would be ignored, subjected to the kind of attacks, the data attacks by Glass and other people. I didn't anticipate any of that. It's taken me the better part of my 50-some years in education to get it, that most of my colleagues, the majority of people in education, I don't think give a hoot about data or research. That just isn't what guides their decision making.
It was really a crisis period. It was, an emotional crisis as well as one of what steps were going to be taken next. But it was the first of many hard lessons that Zig and others have learned about the bureaucratic nature of the system and the way in which it defends itself.
Midway during Project Follow-Through, Zig's team decided to move to a setting that would allow them to train teachers. Despite having substantial funding, they found only 2 education departments that were interested: Temple University in Philadelphia and the University of Oregon in Eugene.
I voted for Temple because Oregon was remote with respect to our sites, and it was the end of the world. Travel out of here is insane. Whereas if we were in Temple, we'd be within spitting distance of 10 of our sites. So that was great. And the negotiations were going great with Temple, and then we got a letter from this university level dean that we were negotiating with, and we hadn't heard from him for a while, and then here comes this letter. So I'm sorry to announce that I can't invite you to come to Temple University because the staff and faculty in 2 departments voted unanimously not to have you come here. Unanimously. I could see a plurality or a majority, but unanimously. That'll stick in a guy's craw right.
So the team ended up in Oregon and continued to develop DI. Together with his colleagues, Zig went on to author over 100 programs in everything from writing to earth science, from chemistry to logic, from social studies to algebra. As a result, hundreds of thousands of students around the world have achieved educational success. Over his long career, Zig has not only advanced at-risk kids, he's accelerated middle-class kids, and in addition, done pioneering work with traumatic brain-damaged adults and with deaf and autistic children.
Right hand. Good job. Hands down, hands down.
Everybody, what's the first name? The first name is?
Planes!
Yes, planes. Nice answer. The next name is?
Motorcycle!
Very good.
Two.
Next word. Get ready.
Bee.
Bee. Next word. Get ready.
Cow.
Cow. Next word. Get ready.
Boy.
Boy. Well done. Another 3 points.
So when we heard the central aphorism from direct instruction that if the student has not learned, the teacher has not taught, we then knew that this is an education approach that gives no alibi other than a failure to teach.
Listen, have, say it.
Have.
What sound do you have at the end of the word?
We can teach every child.
How do you spell that sound?
The only assumption you're allowed to make in DI is, I'm going to teach it, the kid's going to learn it. All right? So you can't write any children off.
Continue. Climb. Continue. Bucket. Continue. Strain. Continue. Anchor. Continue.
It's engineered to get results, and nothing in the program is irrelevant.
Everybody, what word?
Road. Let's see if you can do that a little more quickly. That was a good group response.
It's highly interactive. They do a task, the teacher gives feedback, they do another task, the teacher gives feedback, and the tasks build on each other and combine so that the kids can do more and more difficult things in a fairly short amount of time. In the beginning, it looks like you're learning all these little bitty things, but over time, suddenly you're doing things that just amaze the kids and the teachers.
But here, like 97, it's a prime. 96, it's got factors.
I think his most important contribution has probably been just in demonstrating that kids with poor prospects can in fact learn and get right up there with the kids in the leading schools.
Thank you, Sandy. Sandy and the others were near the shed, the cop said.
I think those demonstrations are probably going to live on. People will keep turning them up time after time as things start to look dismal or hopeless.
So he couldn't see when he didn't have glasses, is that right? Is that right?
No, you gotta
Here, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Wait, listen to the
Wait a
questions.
minute.
Go ahead.
So then what did he get that helped him out?
I'd like my dad to be remembered for transforming society into a place where all kids are learning the skills that they should learn, and that nobody is prevented from realizing opportunities because they don't have the education.
Yeah, and then when he put them on?
He's provided the tools to be able to teach every kid all the basic and higher order skills that they need to be successful, and I hope his legacy is that they're utilized to the point where all kids are successful in our culture.
One thing that drives Zig is that knowledge of what most kids in inner urban areas are experiencing is so much different from what they could experience. That knowledge, that gap, never leaves them for a second. So that's probably the most important driving force. And the other thing is he's a fighter. I mean, he's not your mamby-pamby education professor, which may have some really gray lines of criteria. No, this is someone who has looked at education in scientific ways and understands what kids are capable of and what rightfully they should be receiving.
Okay, so let's start out the next lesson.
Today, Zig still writes programs. He paints. He plants trees. Geniuses are not always recognized in their lifetimes. So perhaps it's not totally surprising that Zig's brilliance has so far been missed by most other educators.
Hey. There it is.
History may eventually recognize him as the Galileo or Darwin of education. But until such validation comes, Zig can be proud of all he has achieved, satisfied that his many instructional programs have changed the lives and prospects of hundreds of thousands of at-risk kids.
She said, I don't even have to touch it. Big Bill said, I've got work to do. I'm leaving. The end.
That was beautiful.